Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live. I'm Megan Clark. I'm the managing editor of Religion Unplugged. ReligionUnplugged.com is a global award-winning religion magazine, and we cover the intersection of religion and politics, religion and culture, and we're supported by a journalism education nonprofit called the Media Project. You can read about their programs at themediaproject.org. And here with me today is my co-moderator, Bobby Ross Jr., and he is the editor-in-chief of the Christian Chronicle and also a columnist for Religion Unplugged with a weekend column called The Weekend Plug-in, which is a great roundup of some of the best religion news reporting out there every week. So I'm going to hand it off to Bobby to introduce our guest today for a very special event. Bobby, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Megan. It's great to be here this morning. Today, as you may know, is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So we thought this would be a real timely panel discussion to do today. We've got three very special guests, and I'm sure you'll get to know them a lot better as we go through this Facebook Live. But we've got Anna Salton Eisen and her son, Aaron Eisen. Anna's the daughter of Holocaust survivors. Aaron's the grandson of Holocaust survivors. I first wrote about Anna and Aaron and their family around 2004, I think, when I was working for AP in Dallas, and then just did a feature on some of the connections with Holocaust survivor families that the Eisen family has made in recent times for AP this past October. And then Anna and her family and Aaron have been in the news again because Anna's one of the founding members of Congregation Beth Israel, if I'm saying that right, in Colleyville, Texas. And they've been in the news for reasons that probably, if you're watching this, you know about. And then our other guest is one of the premier religion writers in America, former president of the Religion News Association, has covered religion at the Louisville Courier Journal, as well as the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where he won a Pulitzer for a very sad situation, the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue. He and his colleagues at the Post-Gazette won a Pulitzer just for their wonderful, trying to think of the word, just their sympathetics, maybe not the word, but just they covered a very sad situation in a way that makes me proud as a journalist. And they won a Pulitzer for that coverage. And then just a couple of years ago, Peter was a finalist for another Pulitzer for a project that he and some colleagues did, I think, about sex abuse in Mennonite and Amish communities. Just very amazing journalism there. And now Peter is a global religion writer for the Associated Press based in Pittsburgh, and just still doing some amazing coverage, and has reported on some of the various angles that have emerged after Colleyville. So that's kind of gives you an idea of just the high quality level of panelists we have today. And we're just very blessed to have you guys here. And Megan, I think I'll pivot back to you to ask the first question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. And I forgot to put in my introduction. I'm actually from Tarrant County, which is not too far from Colleyville. So when I saw that news, it was from the local Fort Worth Star Telegram, actually. And why don't we start off, Anna and Aaron, by you telling us, what did you experience that day seeing this news come out? Were you watching the live stream already from Congregation Beth Israel? And, as the news came in, what were you guys experiencing?
So, it was just a regular Saturday, and I got a text message from a fellow friend and congregant saying, a rabbi is being held hostage at gunpoint in Congregation Beth Israel. She used CBI. And I looked at it and I thought, is this real? And so I dialed her. She was hysterical and said, get on Facebook. So I logged onto the page. We have been streaming services for a while because of COVID, offering a hybrid, you can go or live stream. And when I clicked on it and it began, I could see the pulpit but no people. But I could hear conversation. I even clicked on the closed caption, and I just heard the conversation between the rabbi, who sounded like he was trying to be calm and, speak in a very measured tone, and the gunman, and his conversations with the rabbi, as well as with the eventually SWAT or FBI. And this went on for hours.
I was also watching the live stream, and when that got cut off in the afternoon, I transitioned to the news coverage, and I was watching with my grandmother, a Holocaust survivor, and it was very upsetting. We didn't know what would happen, and it was very difficult for us to bear.
And your grandmother just turned 100 on Monday, is that right?
On the 22nd, on Saturday.
Saturday, okay, sorry, I got
100th
the dates
birthday.
messed up.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
fine.
Wow.
And Peter, maybe we could hear from you as well. I know you did quite a bit of reporting during the Colleyville incident and helped, I'm sure other people report as well and edit. So what did you learn during this coverage in particular and after the Colleyville incident?
Well, as you can imagine, the reporters that were on the ground there in Texas were covering the breaking news, what's happening actually in the building. But I joined the coverage because it was very obvious, even in spite of a very, at best, poorly worded FBI statement originally. It was pretty obvious this was an anti-Semitic attack. And so actually my initial story was about that, was looking at the nature of this attack. Now the FBI agent who made the initial statement was saying, this hostage taker has a particular cause in mind, trying to get this prisoner released. So it wasn't, I don't remember the exact term, but that it didn't directly target the Jewish community or words to that effect. And they eventually corrected that because it was clear from the words, and I did not, I didn't find out about it before the Facebook Live cut off, but from what everyone has said, the words of the gunman were very clearly steeped in an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that basically Jews control the world, and all we have to do is pull the right strings, and I can get released to this prisoner who I want released. And this prisoner also, who was convicted of, I believe, attempting to kill American service people, was also at her trial making very similar types of conspiratorial comments. So the nature, the motive, and also most obviously the target. We've already had, the Tree of Life incident was by far the most egregious. That was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in US history. But there have been others. There was a synagogue in Poway, California that also was subject to a deadly anti-Semitic attack. And then they're the ones that get less publicity, the graffiti, the threats, or the hate mail, that sort of thing. So there's been a lot of emphasis already in recent years on synagogue security, which actually has received some government funding just in general in hardening houses of worship, providing grants that can help boost security there. So that was already happening. And obviously this has put this discussion again on the front burner of synagogue security, house of worship security, as well as it's put on the front burner again, the very real threats of anti-Semitic, whether it's beliefs and violence.
And if I could just add, this morning, I was thinking about and reflecting on the fact that, and something I haven't talked about yet, is that this is not the first time that I have been a witness or touched by a hostage situation. And I actually went to my upcoming book that Aaron and I wrote together, Pillar of Salt, and found, verified that I had written about this. But in March of 1977, when I was a student at American University in Washington, DC, the Hanafi Muslims took 3 government buildings hostage, including the B'nai B'rith, which is a Jewish service organization, and they held 149 people hostage. A reporter was killed, a police officer, and at the time, Councilman Marion Barry, who became a 4-time mayor, was hit by a ricocheted bullet. And so I was there, I wrote about it in the book. And I even made the national news. I couldn't find the picture online that I was standing outside in the rain, holding a sign saying never again. This is before Holocaust museums, before Schindler's List, before Holocaust education. I'm not even sure anyone knew what never again meant, or that it, was referring to the Holocaust. But even at the age of 18, I was touched by the history, and I was present during this 2-day hostage siege. And it was similar in that the hostage takers wanted the release of people in prison, and also that reported in the media was that they had the same tropes, that the Jews control the press and the courts. So I just, find it hard to believe that all these years later, it's a similar kind of situation that I've been touched by.
Were you aware of that initial FBI statement that Peter talked about?
Not till after the fact. I think the first few days I was just so caught up in the immediacy of dealing with the crisis, making sure everyone was okay. But then, I'm not sure, how they arrived at that initial opinion, but the fact that it was reversed based on the tropes. I mean, there was, there's nothing I can say except for that I'm glad that they have, changed their statement, and that now, the realization is coming that the threat and the actions were because of anti-Semitism, and it was terrorism.
Where are we as far as anti-Semitism, and is the situation getting any better in the United States, or is this latest hostage situation just an indication that it's getting worse? I would be interested in hearing from the Eisens as well as Peter on that question.
I think it's getting worse. I'm a graduate of the University of Virginia, and I went there because the school has a great record of being supportive of Jewish students. My grandfather came to speak there about the Holocaust. I took Hebrew classes. I went to Israel. I took all sorts of classes about the Holocaust. And when the Unite the Right march happened, I was just kind of in shock that this place that had been so welcoming to me was now under threat of anti-Semitism. So I think it's gotten worse.
Were you there at the time?
No, I'd already graduated.
Okay.
And then also what we see, that it's not safe, for Jewish students on college campuses. Sometimes they're hesitating to meet in public, to wear their religious garb or religious symbols and jewelry. Flyers are being distributed, with all kinds of anti-Semitic rhetoric, even tied to COVID. So I think that, it's getting worse. The Anti-Defamation League is reporting the increase is substantial, greater than, any recent time in history. And so even though it's not government sponsored, and we do have laws now for hate crimes, I think that we have to continue to take a very proactive stance and try and do what we can to deter this and show people that we're a united country and this will not be stood for here.
I'm curious why, this is for both of you as well, but why do you think that the anti-Semitism is increasing right now? Like, what's behind it?
Sure. I think historically, if you look at in the Middle Ages, the Black Death was the most deadly pandemic in human history. And people were looking for a scapegoat, and they blamed the Jews for poisoning the wells. And after the First World War, Hitler also used the Jews as a scapegoat. And I think now we're in a difficult time with the coronavirus, and people are looking for a common target. And I think the Jews are a familiar and presence that people have picked on throughout history. And I think they're just looking for a scapegoat.
And I also think that, what's going on as far as the politics worldwide with what's going on in the Middle East and nationalism, revisionism with the Holocaust, people trying to establish that if there was no Holocaust, there's no need for a Jewish homeland. So I think it's really complex. There's a lot of scholars who are addressing this. And even when you look at some of the international things that are going on, in Poland now, there are cases in the courts that people are not allowed to claim that the Poles were collaborators, or you can get sued in civil court. But I always, point to Germany and say, this is the country where it happened, where it originated, and they have penal codes and laws that do not allow revisionism, Holocaust denial, swastikas. And so if they are not going to deny it, why is anyone else? I mean, but I think that's a question that has many, many answers. And I think it also is a question that has no answers. What is the basis for hatred?
Peter, I'm curious, in your reporting, what you have found as far as the state of anti-Semitism in the U.S.?
Those who keep track of things, so the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, has been keeping stats on this for about, I think, since 1979. And in recent years, they have said that anti-Semitic incidents have reached their highest level since they've been keeping track of them. I think they had one particularly high year in the 90s, but maybe two of the other top years were within the last couple of years. So they've reported it being very high. The FBI, when it keeps hate crime statistics in the category of religious hate crimes, anti-Semitic crimes, are the highest. So it has been a trend, and there have been local groups that have taken surveys that, whether statistically or anecdotally, have reported very troubling cases of them, and from multiple directions. So the cases of the synagogue attacks in Pittsburgh and in Poway, California, both were linked to suspects with ties to kind of right-wing anti-Semitic theories. This one in particular, the suspect in the Texas case was working more from a politically Islamist faction that also had, in this particular movement he was in, harbored very similar conspiratorial views. So it's coming from more than one direction from these factions. So it's been very concerning for a number of years now.
If I could ask one more follow-up question. I'm curious, from Peter and from the Eisens, when journalists are reporting on a breaking news event like what happened in Colleyville, how can they do a better job of framing the context for what's happening? There's a lot of factors going into. Journalists are trying not to spread Islamophobia, for example. If they find out the suspect has a Muslim name or a Muslim identity, they don't know the motive yet. But then, when the FBI comes out with a statement that says he's a British citizen, and then the headline is that he's a British citizen, it can feel to other people like there's not enough context, and is that really the most relevant part of the story of what's going on? So I'm curious if any of you have advice for journalists covering this breaking event. And a lot of people may not read the follow-up story that has the more context. And so the first story is the story that maybe the most people see. So how can the media do a better job in these kinds of events?
Well, I think post 9/11, everyone wants to know, who is this person? Where did they come from? What is their affiliation? I'm sure that the FBI or law enforcement wants to know, is this a lone individual? Is it tied to an organization where there'll be other actions? So establishing, their information and safety is a priority. So I think, I applaud Peter and the other journalists for the coverage that they did. I thought it was very thorough, very complete, very competent, and also very empathetic. And I, read the follow-up, but it's still unfolding now. And I think that there were things reported in the British media that I didn't read here about this gunman's situation, you know, the businesses he was in, his history, personal history, the group that he was involved with in Manchester and becoming radicalized. So that added more context than what I read here. But overall, I think the coverage was excellent. And, you know, I'm a big Peter fan. I've already been a Bobby fan, but now I'm also a Peter fan.
The first day coverage is, as you know, particularly challenging because often all you know is, you know, there's some audio from the Facebook Live until it gets cut off. You have what the authorities are saying, and it's always important just to report what you know and to say what you don't know. Because in that first day of coverage, you're probably not going to have all the pieces or even enough of the pieces to really assemble the kind of context that you'll ultimately want. And then in the days to come, you do assemble that. But I think also to your point earlier, it's I think it was covered pretty early on that there was not only that Rabbi Citron Walker had an interfaith kind of a group of clergy of different faiths that he interacted with, but that they came to the scene as much as they could, tried to help out as much as they could, including Muslim leaders, so that it was not just a, you know, as best as possible, you want to show, you know, that this is one particular person's taking of a brand of ideology. It was not a broad brush of any one community there. And then you just, you know, you're right, not everyone does read the follow-up coverage, but you still, you know, want to flesh out the story as best as you can in the days to come and the weeks to come. And we'll, as you know, as Anna said, the story is continuing to develop. They just charged yesterday the person who provided the firearm he had a firearms violation himself. So we'll learn more as we go, and we should report it as we go.
Well, let's move on. We have a few more topics we want to get to, but probably the most important today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Aaron and Anna, can y'all talk about why this day is important in general and also specifically for your own family?
Well, I think the United Nations sent a message last week with their new resolution on Holocaust denial. This resolution had a lot of the same language as the resolution in 2005 about Holocaust Remembrance Day, that we need to combat Holocaust denial, teach the Holocaust to future generations to prevent genocide, and also commend those places where the Nazi concentration camps have been preserved. So I've been to Europe, to many of the concentration camps, and it's very important for the future generations to get this education in the museums, at the camps, through the Arlson archives, which my mom will talk about. So I just, it's a very important day for our family and for all civilization to really take these lessons to heart. So,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I second what Aaron says. I think that, you know, if we can learn from history, preserve it. You know, nowadays we have to preserve the truth in history, the accuracy, and teach the lessons, which is that, you know, we have to stop hate, or in my father's words, which is actually going to be a film, you know, he says at the beginning, at one time there was a civilized country that thought that a part of its population was less than human. And I think when we lose the equality, the respect, the tolerance, the inclusion, then, you know, these opinions and thoughts lead to changes in how we treat other people and can ultimately lead to, you know, violence. I mean, in my family, this has been something ingrained my whole life. I mean, I was a docent for the Holocaust Museum. I did interviews for Spielberg. I spoke in schools. This is something that I've always been a part of. It didn't just start recently or with the books or the documentary film, but I just feel that, you know, I have an obligation as a witness once removed to spread my father's testimony and try and use it, as he would say, as a cautionary tale that, you know, it's never over. I really thought after the Holocaust museums and Schindler's List, I thought, okay, we've solved this. It's good. Everyone will see this movie and we'll all be nice. And in every generation, we have to teach it. We have to pass it on to the new generations, because I think they learn differently now through technology, and they need their visual. And I think we have to find a way to promote learning of history and the changing of how we treat each other in order to, you know, save humanity.
And we have been working with the hashtag Every Name Counts initiative through the Arleston Archives, which is a way to build a digital memorial to the victims of Nazi persecution, which is especially relevant on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So you can go to the Arleston Archives website, and they have documents in English that they need to be indexed. They're trying to get 20,000 documents in 48 hours. So it's a very interactive way to learn about the Holocaust, to combat Holocaust denial, because when you see the documents with your own eyes, there's no denying it, and to insert these people's names into the database. So
yeah, Bobby, I'll say that it was after, you know, the story you just did about me using the documents and ancestry and the archives that I got involved. I'm actually now an ambassador for the Arleston Archives, and they had this program, this challenge, and Aaron and I were on last night for hours. It's really simple. You log on, and right in front of me were these index cards with the name of someone, possibly their date of birth, their occupation, you know, cheesemaker, baker, housewife, and you enter it in, and then in the future or now, someone who's doing a search for a relative, that index card, that actual document will be pulled up. So there are millions of documents. You right now can look at individual camps, and they're trying to get their own platform so that, you know, English speakers or whatever it is, you know, that you can go on and be of help. And anyone can do this. You don't have to register even. You just log on, read some simple instructions, and go. So we will be continuing today, tonight, tomorrow. And it's a way to put history in your hands. It really is, as Aaron said, quite emotional and powerful when you have these documents right in front of you that otherwise, you know, you would have to go to the archives and get gloved up and go in and you know, even be able to see first person.
Can you tell us one more time where to find that so people know?
sure, Arleston, AROLSEN -archives.org. And then you can do /EN for the English. And from there, they have the Every Name Counts right on their front page. You can log on.
So it's taken me a minute to understand exactly. I guess there are names that without stories attached to them, or what is it that you're trying to? How are you bringing honor to these names? I guess I'm not understanding 100% what you're saying.
Sure. So there are millions and millions of documents, and they are not all digitized. So for instance, when I go to Arleston.archives and I put in a search, which you can do or ask them to do, of my father's name during the Holocaust, Lucian Zaltzman, 3 documents came up: concentration camp records, post-war records. But there are millions of records that are not yet in the digital system. They have these, and they want everyone and anyone to go to their site, and you can automatically start entering, you know, a card pops up or a concentration camp list. And every time you enter something, you know, type in the fields like you do if you're ordering, you know, for a credit card online, and then that document is now in the index in the system. So it is accessible to anyone searching for that name. So there are millions of records. I don't know. I can tell you right now, last night I saw, you know, in the span of 30 minutes, 2 records come up with my cousin's names, last name, which has a very unusual spelling. I don't know or think it was a relation, but, you know, these are things that for those of us who are searching and wanting to know, and not just Jews. I mean, these are people who were in any of the 20-some countries, in Belgium and Paris and Germany and Hungary, Italy. So these are records for all of us that tell our family stories.
And I've been involved in Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremonies where just reading the names of the victims of Nazi persecution is a powerful ritual. For many of these individuals, they were just numbers in the camps. So to really give them back their name, give them back their story, I think is a powerful memorial.
And I think last night you had one card of a young, how old was the victim?
1 month old.
1 month old that had an index card for, had been born and in the Holocaust for a month. So, we're preserving history by entering these documents into a way that they can be found by us and future generations.
Megan, Peter, do y'all have any more questions before I move on to the little talk about the book? I guess not. Well, you've got a book cover behind you for Pillar of Salt, and then also the 23rd Psalm, which was your dad's book. Why don't y'all tell us a little bit about both of these books? And Anna, maybe even go back to the beginning of having your dad kind of going most of his life without wanting to talk at all about this.
Yeah, so like many of children of survivors, I grew up in a home where the Holocaust wasn't talked about. I think that, in general, society wanted everyone to make peace with the past, to move on. It was difficult and painful to talk about. And I think that they couldn't find a way to really, touch our innocence and violate our sense of safety by telling us these horrific stories. But when I was about 8, I found some watercolor paintings signed by Lucian Zaltzman. I had no idea who it was. And I pushed them back in the drawer where I found them and kept the secret and kept the silence. I think I even remember going to a friend's house and telling her that, my dad was in a camp and all my relatives had been murdered. And her parents pulled me aside sometime after and told me, not to talk about that. So I felt, ashamed that I had maybe done something wrong. And so I kept the silence. When I moved to Dallas in 1984, I went to what they had is a Holocaust museum, which was actually the first boxcar brought to the United States. And when I went into the museum through the boxcar, I learned everything. I mean, they had the entire Holocaust explained in documents and photos, everything in 1933, Hitler coming to power, the boycott, the burning of the books, Kristallnacht in 38, the voyage of the St. Louis in 39, the Wannsee Conference that just had its 80th anniversary where they, organized the final solution, and then the camps and liberation. And so I became very active. And in 1998, I kind of had been doing the interviews and confronted my father and just said, I don't want you telling this story to a stranger. I don't want to watch it on a video. And so he began to talk, and we went to Poland twice, to the major sites, but also to where he had been in the ghetto, to where he had been in the same camp in Schindler's List, Plaszow. And we went to his town and even into his house, which was a very, very traumatic event, as we were most polite and gracious. And, again, under the surface was just our trauma and our shock and our hurt that this had happened. So I helped him co-write his book, which is now coming out in August as a 20th anniversary edition with a new foreword by Michael Berenbaum, a very noted Holocaust scholar that was one of the curators of the U.S. Holocaust Museum, as well as excerpts from his speeches and talks and photographs. So that will be coming out. And then the book that Aaron helped me write, he was an English major at UVA. So as you journalists probably know, he took my draft and helped me tell it. And because he had been with me to Poland, he understood the experience, knew my parents. And so that is coming out at the end of April. And then in addition, we're working on a documentary film by a brilliant young filmmaker named Jacob Wise. And he is the great nephew of one of the founders of the Orlando Holocaust Museum, who was in Auschwitz. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the people involved with the film, third generation, are related to liberators in World War II. They had family that was Jewish and affected by the Holocaust. There's a musical score, animators, illustrators. So I'm kind of handing it off because, now that, I'm given the opportunity to tell the story, I really feel that the next generation will have a way through technology, social media, the visual way that they are more comfortable with, and people of my generation, or at least me, is going to be more effective. And I think we have to pass it down so that they can integrate it and not be, just lectured by me, but they have to spread the message peer to peer.
It really has been an intergenerational story. So the 23rd Psalm, my grandfather wrote the book. My mother was a part of that project. Pillar of Salt, which is the companion volume, I was involved with that project. And you see some of the same towns and names and camps in both books, as well as the documentary. So there's a thematic unity to it. And also, I've been to Poland with my grandfather, and that is really part of the core, going back to these sites. And that's not an experience everyone has been on, or with the dying off of the current Holocaust survivors. Maybe not everyone will get the chance to go back with a survivor. So we really wanted to record that experience in Pillar of Salt, to have that guide, my grandfather, walk us back through his town, the camps he was in the ghetto. And it's really a very powerful experience that we wanted to share.
And I've your original version that your dad wrote, just an amazing memoir. And I'm wondering, Pillar of Salt, kind of, how do you take that to the next level? What insight do you think readers will gain in the new perspective from the second and third generations?
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Sure. One thing I will say about my grandfather is that he had only been back to Poland one time on a business trip. And he hadn't really gone to many of the locations. So the experience recounted in Pillar of Salt in 1998, when he goes with his family, was really the first time for him to walk those same roads.
You mean 23rd Psalm?
No, in 23rd Psalm, in the prologue.
Oh, you're talking about the new book. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you're giving more okay.
Yes. In the prologue, he is in the town for a few minutes, but in Pillar of Salt, he really goes back on an in-depth look into his house. And it's I think that level of insight from him is something we really wanted to capture. And the film is called In My Father's Words. So really getting the story and preserving it from George Salton is really one of the goals of this project.
And I'll add that, Aaron helped in developing the book. So the first section really deals with, my growing up, not knowing what that was like, which is, was shared, as in the story that you did, Bobby. None of the 7 other families knew, because there was, a generational silence. And just how that felt, how different it is to have a secret, to not feel connected to your friends or community, and what that experience was like, which is something that we can all have in our lives when we are not disconnected, when we are not sharing our stories with other people. In the middle section, it is about like a travelogue and going back. And part of this was that when I went back and tried to say to people, when they would say, how was your trip? It was the most powerful, meaningful trip I've ever taken. It was not a vacation. I can't wait to go back. We are planning to go back as soon as COVID allows, and go to France, where he was in the camps, go to Arleston. We have people there that have graciously offered to host us and be our guides. And when people would say I could never go back, I thought, this can't be lost as well, the experience we had with my father, and also that it's changing. So certain places that I went, the old quaint towns and the old homes and former synagogues are being torn down. And then in the third section, it really was the impact part of it, living in the Bible Belt, coming to terms with my identity, living with anti-Semitism, finding the resolve to live like my father did, with courage and give the testimony. And then also the just miraculous connections, not just with children of survivors, but with liberators of the 82nd Airborne, the 504th. I'm a huge supporter. I was a volunteer with the USO. I was raised to really have gratitude. And for people who knew my father or read the book, when he came to America, one of the first things that happened was that he was drafted and went from 5th grade and served in the US Army, and then used the GI Bill to get a bachelor's in physics, a master's in engineering, and had a career at the Pentagon. So one of my neighbors, James McGillis, Maggie, was the most highly decorated veteran of the 82nd Airborne. He liberated my father, and they actually became friends and traveled to Europe and went back to the camp where they met across the wire. And so I would say, since both books came out over the past 20 some years, we have found that our stories are also the stories of other people. And that has probably been the most rewarding reasons why we share, as well as sharing it among the generations, among other faiths. It's not just a Jewish story. His fellow prisoners were not Jews. And the kindness of some people that helped him stay alive, of Christians, are written about. And it's very, very important for people to know that, a very small act, whether it's giving someone food or shelter, or even at one point when he is being beaten and another prisoner who is not Jewish, and they just connect their eyes. And in a moment, my father felt just that support to help him endure one more day.
Wow. We've got, I think, 3 or 4 minutes left. Megan, any questions, or as far as anybody leaving comments on Facebook? Or
We don't have any comments, but I wonder if you could share briefly how you got the titles of your books, and what meaning that has for your family.
So the 23rd Psalm is something that I think my father related to in many ways. And, because he felt that he had walked in the valley of the shadow of death. And when he writes about in his book how the bread was divided among the prisoners, just some of the things that he endured. And it was a prayer that when he read, and I've been with him many times in synagogue, it was personal, and you could hear it in his voice. As far as Pillar of Salt, I chose that because it resonated with me. And I know that growing up, I had been warned by my own family, be careful, don't look back, this will change you, don't talk about it with grandpa. There are other survivors who did not cope well or even took their own lives. I'm being very honest here, but I felt compelled to know more about my grandmother than how she died. I carry her name. So that's just something that I related to, that I could look back and be, more than a pillar of salt. I could look back at this pain, and, I could help my father endure his own painful memories and his own trauma. I'm also a licensed therapist. And so, I understand how important it is that we help each other, that we lean on each other, that recovery from trauma is not something you do alone. You do it with other people when you integrate your story and you are accepted and cared for and loved and can rejoin society with your history and be okay with sharing it.
well,
Thank you
thank
so
all
much.
thank all of y'all so much, Peter, Anna, Aaron. This has been great. And for those of you who may be tuned in late, you can watch the whole video on Facebook. I think in a few minutes it will be there. And then we're also making a YouTube video that I will include as part of tomorrow's weekend plug-in column at religionunplugged.com, so you can have access to it there. And I guess we're actually going to end on time. And thank you for watching, and hope everybody has a good rest of your day.
Thank you for helping us. Meet us on arlson.archive.